Hello and welcome back to the channel. In a recent video I posted how to conduct a negotiation with the aim of rejoining the EU single market, and that video generated obviously a fair bit of comment and interest, and regular people who follow, people who regularly follow this channel will know that I like to argue both sides. So this is what this video is about. It is a counter to that video of rejoining the EU. Now, for those who may have not seen that, I will post a link to that in the video description below. Now, I've got a bit of a challenge here because actually everything I said in that previous video can apply also in this video, with the notable exception, of course, of actually trying to rejoin the EU. But everything else in there could equally be applicable to the strategy of trying to make Brexit work. So I'm going to do things a little bit differently in this video. I'm going to take a slightly different tack and talk about some of the key issues there. Now, for anyone not familiar with this channel, I am the collaborative negotiator. I'm a professional negotiator of over 10 years of experience, and I like to talk about negotiation strategies and Brexit, which is the biggest example of negotiation failure that we have today. And I know this is a statement that will be disputed by many, but I think one of the things that's key to point out is that for anyone truly digging into Brexit policies that have currently been implemented, we'll see lots of examples of significant failure. So the purpose of this video is to imagine a scenario where the Conservatives have been removed from power. The next leader comes in, it might be a Labour leader, might be someone else, who knows, doesn't matter. But let's assume they are very different from the Conservatives in terms of outlook, in terms of what they want to achieve. Let's also assume for this scenario that they do not want to rejoin the EU, they actually want to make Brexit work and to succeed. So what would that party, those individuals, need to actually do? Well, the first thing they need to do is acknowledge the current mess. And I know this is the old adage that, to fix a problem, you first got to identify the problem. You've got to admit it. And this is one of the problems currently prevalent in British politics. It is a very strong desire not to admit that Brexit has significant problems. So to make Brexit work, you need to know the problems, you need to fix the problem. And I've broken this down into some high-level issues. This video is only ever going to be high-level. This is a big topic and I'm not going to go into it in great depth. But what I'm trying to do is explore some of the big items that people need to think about. Now, I'm not coming at this in terms of pushing forward particular policies or positions. I'm using these as examples and say that my assumption here is that whoever comes in is very different from the Conservative Party. So these sorts of policies are the sort of things that they would be interested in. So let's get started on that. First step, I think, and as I previously said in the previous video, you've got to detoxify Brexit. And one of the easy ways to do that is to tackle political corruption. So because Boris Johnson and what he has done has tainted Brexit. And it's nothing to do with Brexit, technically speaking. But Brexit as a programme is now tainted by what the political scandals surrounding the Conservative Party. Any new leader wanting to give themselves some credibility, a bit of a clean slate, will want to do something about that. They want to clean up politics in the UK to obtain more legitimacy to help them push forward certain policies. That's one thing. The next step is that there is indisputably a need for reform. Now, this is one of the things I pointed out in a video quite a few months back that is rarely acknowledged by even those who support Brexit. That many of those who voted for Brexit voted so because they wanted improved accountability. They wanted better democracy. And yes, there can be significant disagreement about the idea of removing the EU in order to obtain better democracy. I shan't go into that argument in this video. But the whole point is that people wanted accountability. They wanted to elect people who would be accountable to them for the decisions that impact on their lives, spending decisions and so on. Because whatever good the EU did when it comes, for example, to funneling money to deprived areas, ultimately the EU was not accountable for those decisions and the impact of those projects. This is why there's a very interesting correlation between those who voted strongly for Brexit and those regions that actually received quite high amounts of EU funding. So whoever wants Brexit to work has to tackle this issue. They have to create electoral reform and accountability. They have to have an improved UK democracy, which, by the way, is one of the least democratic systems in the world today. It's an old system, and it needs significant updating to reach modern standards. I'm not going to talk about this too much, as I did so in the previous video, but I wanted to make the point that this would be a big package of work required in order to make Brexit succeed. And the Conservative Party know this, but the truth is that they would rather centralise power in Westminster than actually devolve it out to local councils. And I know there have been a few exceptions, such as the police and crime commissioners and mayor stuff and so on, but actually the trend has been the opposite. The trend has been more to centralisation of power. So that would be a clear policy shift for any new person who wanted to make Brexit work. It would adopt a different political system where, for example, councils or regions had their own budgets and set their own priorities on what it got spent on in their areas. And that also comes to devolution. And there is no doubt that Brexit and what is currently going on has significantly caused issues for the Union. So as part of this electoral reform, it would not be inconceivable to create a new devolution settlement. So for example, Scotland and Northern Ireland and Wales would actually have more tax raising, more funding abilities, more options to raise money to set what they do in their areas to make changes. So think a bit like the US sort of system, where you do have the federal government and then you have the state government sort of thing. Of course, it certainly would not be identical. It would be a very different, unique UK system, but those would need to be tackled. That sort of thing would need to be put together and negotiated with those devolved areas as well. Then, of course, we come to all the trade deals. Now, for anyone who's not been following my channel, I do have some actual knowledge of what good trade deals look like, and I can absolutely promise you that the current set of trade deals are ridiculous. They are shockingly bad. And that is because they're being rammed through at speed with no care for quality, essentially, which actually does the UK considerable economic harm. I know it's not going to be a popular message to tell Brexiteers, but a good trade deal takes years, and there's good reason for that. And the problem is the current Conservative government isn't using trade deals to create economic benefits for the UK. They're using trade deals as a political instrument to show, oh look, we've done trade deals, Brexit is working, even though the trade deals aren't actually beneficial to the UK in many instances. So all of that needs to be addressed, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. The final two things that I've highlighted that are needed to make Brexit work is to implement a genuine levelling up agenda. I've spoken before about the fact that there's a lot of regional inequality, and those that have suffered from neglect from Westminster. Again, strong correlation with those who voted in favour of Brexit. The Conservative Party know this. This is why they have all this noise about the levelling up agenda. The problem is that there's more noise than it is substance. So any new political party or leader coming in, again, with the desire to make Brexit genuinely work, would tackle this issue head on. And I'll talk a little bit more about that further on. And then finally, I would say that they need to do something distinctive. I am making the assumption here that the next leadership will be a bit more left-leaning than the current Conservatives, and that they would need something that really made the UK population feel there was a change, that Brexit had resulted in something beneficial. You need to do something headline, if you like. And we do know from polling and other things that nationalisation of railways and utilities would actually be very popular with a large chunk of the country. And that is a signature policy that could really signify a massive change that could be linked to Brexit. Sometimes you can say, well, that's irrelevant to Brexit, and you would not be wrong. However, perception matters in politics. And this is where that pushing forward policies, and this is the problem with politicians, they push forward policies because there's things that are visible. What they don't tell you, the details or the trade-offs or the how those policies get implemented. There is no such thing as a black and white policy in government circles. Everything has a trade-off. Everything has an undesirable consequence. The trick here is understanding that and dealing with it. Unfortunately, politicians don't get rewarded by votes for actually being honest. They get rewarded by votes for dressing up their policies as the next best thing, whilst glossing over all the massive flaws within those policies. So I talked about the trade agreements and that those need significant repair. Because there's one thing where the current Johnson government has done a huge amount of damage to the UK. We'll start with the trade and cooperation agreement with the EU. It's not perfect, and I think it would be obvious that the EU would not welcome any new party or leader coming in and saying we need to reopen it. That is not to say it is impossible, because part of the problem of the trade and cooperation agreement is that it was done too quickly. Johnson put arbitrary deadlines on for that to be signed. So that means it was a rush job. And as we already know with rush jobs, there are lots of mistakes. So it is not inconceivable that a new party could approach the Commission and in the correct way say to the Commission, we need to fix all the errors made by the predecessor and to fix the jobs, the mistakes. And if that is done right, the Commission will be open to those proposals. They won't be open to a complete reopening for the purpose of trying to secure more advantage. And that is the current strategy being adopted by the Conservative government. So this was done under Lord Frost. He would talk about the Northern Ireland Protocol, but actually, when you really read into the details of what he was proposing, it was essentially trying to rewrite the Trade and Cooperation Agreement because he realised all the mistakes and all the cock-ups he put in there by going too fast. So if whoever the new person in, if they come and make it clear that their approach is about fixing it, not reopening it, not securing, not trying to renegotiate commitments for the UK, then the EU had always stated they're open to fixing things. And while they might not agree to reopening the agreement itself, they have said they're willing to create implementation agreements and annexes. And this is one of the things you have to bear in mind about the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. There are massive gaps in it. It doesn't cover a whole bunch of different chunks of economy because they didn't have the time to do it. They just left it for later. So there's plenty of scope here to make various improvements to the agreements to improve trade between the UK and the EU. And one of the big ways of doing this is to institute a policy of alignment by default. Now, a lot of what the EU does is actually very boring. They would create a whole host of regulations and standards governing the quality of goods, for example. And let's be honest, do you really care? Is that something that's really a vote-worthy matter for the electorate? It isn't. But it matters when it comes to trade, because people need to know the standards that they have to adhere to when it comes to delivering goods and services across borders. So the current Conservative government instituted a policy of different by default. And there was no good reason for that. They did that purely to try and dress up their Brexit as being something different. But one of the things you have to understand is that everyone around the world copies EU regulations. And they do so because the EU has spent all this time, all this money and effort understanding what a good standard looks like. So rather than reinventing the wheel, other countries just copy it and then tweak it to suit their economies. And there's absolutely nothing that says the UK cannot do the same, whilst also preserving some of the ethos of Brexit. So to do that, and part of the trade and cooperation negotiations, you would institute a policy of alignment by default. That means the UK will use EU standards and regulations as a default position. This means that many of the goods and services that go across the border into the EU would actually not need to be checked, or the related barriers to trade would be reduced because the EU would then be satisfied that UK standards were in alignment with EU standards. However, what the UK can do is have the option to deviate on a case-by-case basis. One would hope that they would do so in order to achieve higher standards. And in those scenarios, the EU actually has no objections, because EU regulations in many ways are compromises. And if a nation state wishes to go above the compromise to have a higher standard, then the EU would generally tend to welcome that sort of move. The problem is that the current Conservative Party did not want to do that. They wanted to deviate by default so that they could have lower standards, because they had the mistaken belief that it would give them a trade advantage. In reality, it doesn't, it just puts up barriers. So whoever comes in to try and implement Brexit properly needs to have a reverse of that policy. They would also need to have a bit of a strategy for the UK economy. And this is one of the things that is not very clear. The current Conservative Party talks a lot about high-tech, high-wage economy, but actually the current UK economy, the way it works, is by having low wages, and which is usually fulfilled by immigration, for example. They do the jobs that UK people don't necessarily want to do. And so what that means is that, economically speaking, there needs to be alignment between the strategies and the trade deals. You can't have your cake and eat it. You need to be more realistic, and you need to direct the economy to know where is it going to go. Are we going to go high tech? Are we going to go into manufacturing? Are we going to expand on services? All of that is currently missing, completely and utterly rudderless. So that is an important piece of work that would be linked to renegotiating the trade deals. Because the person also, whoever's in charge, also trying to implement Brexit, would have to renegotiate the trade agreements with the likes of New Zealand and Australia. These are dreadful agreements. Now, in the previous video, I said that one way of improving negotiation position is to prosecute the likes of Johnson for corruption and fraud. And that does remain the case here. However, it doesn't mean you have to do that. So anyone trying to implement Brexit in the future can go to those countries, say that these trade agreements are abysmal, and those countries will know that is true, and say that the UK wishes in a collaborative manner to reopen them for the purpose of reaching a more mutually beneficial settlement. However, there has to be a bit of a stick here, and the stick will be that the UK will give those countries notice that if they are unable to reach agreement within, for example, 24 months, then the UK will be unilaterally cancelling bits of those trade agreements. But this thing you have to remember about trade agreements, they're not set in stone. You can cancel them, but you have to give notice of the fact that you're going to cancel them. And you have to go through the proper process, something the current government seems to singularly fail to do on a regular basis. So you initiate the proper process, you say that you wish to redo the trade agreement and you wish to do so in a friendly and a collaborative way. However, they cannot stand in their current form. And then, of course, you go through each of the trade agreements in turn and fix all the gaping holes. Now, there's a final string element to this strategy that should not be underestimated. And that is the whole question of the left behinds. Because anyone who's done a proper in-depth study, not me, but various academics, into the people who voted for Brexit would have found strong correlations between those who have not benefited from globalization and so on. So this is one of the true Brexit benefits that should have been secured, is that you should have had a Westminster government more inwardly focused and more determined to improve economic prosperity within the UK. Now I know the current Conservative government has put a lot of noise into that, a lot of talk about the levelling up agenda and a lot of talk about global Britain, improved prosperity and so on. The problem is, it's all words and very little in the way of actual action and results. And politicians never like talking about results and outcomes because then they get judged against them and usually found wanting. So whoever comes in and replaces the Conservatives and wants to implement Brexit needs to tackle this issue head on. And the first thing they need to do is actually have a strategy. They actually need to do proper analysis of where are the weaknesses in the UK, whether regional based or in terms of sectors. And to understand what are those new weaknesses, what has created them, and what sort of strategies can be adopted to fix them. What that then probably means is that there will need to be strong state intervention to tackle those issues, whether to do with inequality or lack of job prospects and so on. There's a whole range of options. It could be the state themselves funding factories and such like, and there's issues of course with that. It could be the state providing benefits, whether that be tax benefits, subsidies and so on, to industries to be induced into go into those areas and to set up various opportunities. But what you have to remember is the UK government has to be careful here, because in all the agreements, so this was promoted as a Brexit benefit, but what the government doesn't want to, or the Conservatives don't want to admit to, is that every agreement they signed with various nations, whether with the EU or whether with other global organisations, whether even with other countries, those agreements have rules about state aid. And this is because everybody knows that state aid can be used and abused to undermine what is reached in trade agreements. So when you're trying to promote regional regeneration, for example, you have to be very careful not to fall foul of those state aid rules and agreements. And the World Trade Organization has a whole chapter on this sort of thing, which I'm not going to go into. So the strategy has to understand where the weaknesses are and find ways to fix them, but without breaching all those international agreements. And the more international agreements you sign up to, the harder it is to actually do, ironically enough. So what this does mean is that there has to be a radical shake-up of how the UK operates in order to deliver all these benefits. Now, I've spoken about some of the state aid type scenarios, but there's other policy options that the Conservatives, ironically enough, have promoted Brexit very heavily in terms of benefits and things that they want to achieve, but actually really cannot ideologically bring themselves to bring some of these radical reforms that many of those who voted for Brexit would actually like to see. Now, I may be speculating here, but many people who voted for Brexit perhaps would like to see improved welfare, would like to see more state intervention, would like to see nationalisation of industry, well not industry, sorry, of railways and utilities, for example. And these are things that would be easy to dress up as Brexit benefits, but the Conservatives cannot bring themselves to actually do this. Any new party coming in can do so. This can be their signature policy to help them demonstrate that they are getting Brexit done. And to be honest, these policies will probably be aligned to their ideology anyway. Now, what I haven't tackled in all this is the issue of immigration. And this is a difficult one, because the UK economy, as currently structured, functions because of cheap immigration. And of course, as we all know, many people don't like that, particularly those who are detrimentally impacted as a consequence of that. So when doing all these sectoral strategies and nationalisation and whatever, this issue is going to have to be borne in mind, because you do need immigration to implement a lot of this. But whoever does so needs to do it in a way that doesn't alienate those who see immigration as a threat to them rather than as a benefit. So there's a lot of work they would need to do there. I'm not going to go into any detail on it. So what is the true Brexit benefit, perhaps? Well, there's a term I've got in terms of negotiation. I call it fake collaborative negotiation. And that is a technique used by negotiators to try and pretend that you're working together, but actually they're not. They're actually pushing forward proposals that are detrimental to your interest. And the Conservatives seem to be doing this rather a lot. They talk about levelling up. They talk about global Britain and benefits and changing things and political reform and so on. But actually, when you dig into all the details, it is not to the benefit of the general population. That is because they don't believe in it. They don't buy into those benefits. They don't want to deliver what it is, in reality, those who voted for Brexit want delivered. So they're having to dress it up. And it is very hard to sustain a lie in the long term. It's very hard to point to outcomes that people can be happy with to see if it's not what they actually voted for. So this is the true secret, perhaps, in some ways. Those who wanted Brexit wanted radical change. And the Conservatives, funny enough that their name might apply, aren't particularly radical. So this does mean that there is space, political space, for whoever wants to come in and to deliver that radical agenda that they can argue is in line with Brexit aims. The challenge, of course, is to find a way of doing so that is actually workable rather than ideologically driven and wishful thinking. And this is part of the problem what we're seeing in the political discourse at the moment. It is all wishful thinking. It has no basis on genuine reality. There's not been proper analysis to underpin it. And that is a weakness of UK politics in general, not just limited to any one party. So for Brexit to genuinely be delivered, I suppose the answer is you need genuinely competent people to come forward and to deliver it. Where that comes from, I do not know. But that is my little thesis for this video. How to make Brexit successful is basically to elect competent people that genuinely want to try and make the country a success. Now this should be completely agnostic to what they thought about Brexit in the first place, and this is an important point to stress. There are various people in this sort of debate. There are those who thought Brexit was a terrible idea in the first place, but they hardly want to destroy their country. They want things to be better. There are those who thought Brexit was a great idea and think that the current implementation is absolutely dreadful, and they certainly will want to fix things. And then there's perhaps who do like Brexit and do like the current trend. And that group needs to understand the implications of what it is they're going for, because that is an agenda being driven by a very small group of people. It doesn't really represent the majority, even though they make lots of noise and pretend that their view is the majority view. So as is always the case when it comes to any kind of politics or negotiation, it's all about building consensus. And that would be the true secret to delivering Brexit going forward, is to build consensus around the strategies and the aims that people want to see achieved. So I hope you found this video interesting, and I look forward to seeing in the comments in the box below. And if you do enjoy these series, then please do comment, please do hit the like button, and please do subscribe to this channel. Thank you.